Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to another Supatease video, and we've got a pretty big beta update when it comes to Shadowlands, and honestly, we have a couple of changes mostly targeted at legendaries that I'm finding a bit questionable. So we're just going to scroll through it. The classes we're looking at are Death Knight, Druid, Hunter, Mage, Monk, Paladin, Priest, Rogue, and Warrior. This is the first build where I'm kind of wondering what's going on as far as their tuning decisions, because some legendaries that were actually interesting and fun have been basically outright stripped from the game. So scrolling quickly through here, Blood Death Knight is getting a massive buff just across the board to a lot of its spells and abilities. So in Mythic Plus, trying to bring up the competitiveness of multiple tank specializations, so it's not just a one-trick wonder, I would imagine here. Some buffs and increases and nerfs and changes to Unholy Death Knight legendaries to not increase their Dark Transformation by 2 seconds, only by 1 second for every Mortal Coil. It seems like there's a very strong attempt at making the legendaries closer to each other, but in a way, the legendaries that were fun and in my opinion, a little bit more awesome have now been sort of stripped from their overall utility, most notably the Frost Death Knight one being the Obliterate legendary, nerfing the damage and Obliterate. Everybody was talking about the two-handed Obliterate. It was probably a little bit too high overall, obviously, and a 5% nerf, I guess, is reasonable, right, compared to some of the nerfs that we're going to get to later on for other classes. But it is obvious that they're trying their best to focus in on here so that when you decide to go after a specific legendary build, you're not massively worse than a legendary build that another player were to go after, but in a way you're losing a bit of flavor on those specific legendaries as a result. So some rearrange around for the Death Knights. These ones are going to have to be tested and played out before I really can give you a 100% opinion on it, but I wanted you to give you these updates in real time, and then I'll be updating them as we go along. But that could change Frost Death Knight's current placement in PvP. As we scroll through, Abomination's Limb change has finally gone through. We saw a nerf to Shackle the Unworthy, which in my mind, Kyrian Death Knight is just not that interesting of a Covenant ability anyways. But now the Sprout Abomination Limb is confirmed, only gripping a target once every 4 seconds. This may ultimately mean that you go Night Fae for PvE and PvP if you're a DPS Death Knight. So a bit interested to see how that one plays out, nerfing the utility directly. Moving forward for Demon Hunters, a bit lackluster, not seeing too many changes. Fodder to the Flame still remains to be a very odd Covenant ability. While it could be very creative and unique, it's in a place where it has so many downsides and drawbacks to it, where you would call in a demon, then you have to kill the demon, and then you get the buff, which includes your mastery for more damage done to targets, and it drops a puddle on the ground. If you can stay in the puddle, you also get a benefit. There's so many things that have to come together for that to work. And then in PvE, oh, the tank needs to move. Okay, all that stuff I just spent all that time setting up is gone. In PvP, oh yeah, the circle on the ground, I'm not standing in that. So this didn't, in my mind, receive any buffs to really kind of shore up the drawbacks of this ability. So it's a bit unfortunate to Demon Hunters specifically. Balanced Druids receiving a little bit of quality of life changes to the Ravenous Frenzy. BM Hunters receiving some buffs on their legendaries, but also nerfs to others. Again, this is just generally trying to equalize out most of the legendaries, I think, for the game in general. They're nerfing some of the honor talents here, likely because of the legendary for Feign Death already kind of superseding the PvP talent for Hunters anyways. Moving forward, we've got legendary effects. Seems like they really like Latent Poison. They want that to remain from Battle for Azeroth as it received a buff, and then Wildfire Cluster is getting nerfs, so again, more legendary rearranges. Hunter's Mark is now no longer got a damage component. That's a really big portion of this, so it's entirely utility. If you want to chase a target that's in stealth, or you want to cover your freezing trap from a dispel from an imp pet of a warlock, it gives you the outplay and utility in PvP without the drawback of being a button that doesn't really function as AoE in PvE, or just being an extra global cooldown you need to press before doing damage. So this seems like a good middle of the road decision. So PvPers still can benefit from its utility, and then PvEers can kind of just do whatever with it if they want to do something with it. Scrolling through, again, just more legendary rearranges, nothing massive. This is where we start getting into massive changes, is when we get into the mages. So this Arcane Bombardment, and this is where I'm wondering if they're doing these massive swings of changes to try and get you to test a legendary that you otherwise would have written off, and maybe that's why they're buffing it by so much. But I mean, this is double. Arcane Barrage deals 80% damage against targets below 35%, up from 40%. So this is a massive change to Arcane, and this could totally change the ball game for Arcane in the game in general. And there's even more changes like this as we continue to scroll down and get into fire. So these legendaries where you cast a certain amount of fireballs or frost bolts, and then you call in a meteor or call in a frozen orb, are being readjusted pretty heavily. Likely with Frost doing so well in Mythic Plus, I think that's where most of these changes will come into effect, and that's kind of where their reasoning is for most of this in their changes. And it's this one right here, casting 90 frost bolts. 90, even in PvP, counting as double. 45 frost bolts. I don't even know if it's possible in an arena match to cast 45 frost bolts. I'm just thinking about the amount of time that is. It's like at least almost a 2-second cast time, so I don't even want to try to do the math on it. Basically, they've said, okay, we're deleting this legendary, unless maybe still for Mythic Plus. It could have just been that good in Mythic Plus that it needed that much of a nerf, but in PvP, this was a fun one to go after. And then another one, which is a little bit odd, was this one, Grizzly Icicle, which is the PvP legendary. Your Frost, Fire, and Arcane. So they've removed Frost. So it's only Fire and Arcane damage against targets in Frost Nova are increased by 10%. And the spells no longer break it. So Frost doesn't get the 10% increased damage on their Ice Lance. Maybe this is just a tuning adjustment. Frost Mage is really powerful with spam Ice Lance, but what worries me is seeing something like this where the Triune Ward legendary is being buffed to try and increase tankiness. And it's legendaries like this, Soulbind Conduits like this, that really held back Battle for Azeroth and its potential for PvP. And I feel like these are legendaries that in PvE you're probably never going to use. So that its sole purpose is to make PvP less enjoyable. And like that's just my upfront take of the legendary. In PvE, you value damage over absorbs. Absorbs are just very weak. Maybe if it was a damage reduction, you might value it higher. But you're a mage, you need to do damage. So in PvE, why would you ever take this? This maybe only solo content and Torghast to get a bigger shield. But even then, why wouldn't you just want more damage? So it's a bit odd to see this. I'm not excited about these changes. I'm not sure if they did this massive swing of nerf to the mage legendaries to try and encourage you to try different ones, or if this is just how it's going to go, but it could definitely turn the table a lot. Windwalker, more specifically the Kiefer Skyreach, I think is what's standing out to me, is now only 1 minute per target. So instead of just instant transmission Goku every time you Tiger Palm around the map, it's only going to be once per minute per target. So you're not going to be able to just infinitely stay on a target. I think that was a wise decision, as in, again, in PvE, it had no impact anyways to get the extra mobility. It was something that was just making PvP really cumbersome. There's still the legendary where you're able to Transcendence, then Transcendence back, Transcendence again, Transcendence back, and that one could see quite a problematic place in PvP. And again, in PvE, you're probably never going to see it, but that's one that's still on my radar personally that wasn't included in this. We're going to see buffs to the Covenant abilities, Weapons of Order. This is likely trying to make it more viable overall for the Windwalker kit. Still, as it stands right now, Venthyr is just leaps and above beyond the best for PvP, but then also not very good in PvE. So there's some Covenant clashes going on with the monks, specifically being like really heavily oriented towards PvP or heavily oriented to PvE, which is looking a little bit unfortunate. But if you were looking to be a Kyrian monk, you're going to be pretty happy about these buffs. Legendary changes, although likely legendaries that you're not really going after as monk, with a Touch of Death being a significantly shorter cooldown, unless maybe you wanted to do world quests or world PvP and you were actually able to get Touch of Death more frequently. Prop Paladin seeing changes to its Righteous Might, so they stopped doing as much damage. Likely, again, Mythic Plus, but also a little bit of PvP, because Prop Paladin is phenomenal in PvP. So this is just a little bit of a reduction there in their overall power. Changes to Spirit Shell, looking to just increase its viability a little bit here from its legendary. Curious to see how it plays out. It looks like the Devouring Plague rolling over is now actually iterated here, so you will be able to continuously dump Devouring Plagues into a Devouring Plague target. And changes to Death and Madness, although Unfurling Darkness and that talent row is still highly competitive, so Maybe in PvE, again, my opinion there is going to be a little bit less informed. So in PvP, it seems like even with this change, you wouldn't want Death and Madness for Shadow Priest. Hungering Void is now replacing Legacy of the Void, and it's just making Void form more straightforward in my mind and trying to make this talent a really good single target option, which it likely will. We see nerfs to the Shadowflame Prism on the Shadow Fiend Legendary specifically. Again, trying to bring the legendaries in with each other. This is such a tall order for them to actually achieve, to get the legendaries completely equal with each other, especially when some function on long cooldown, some function on AoE, some don't even have damage components. It seems like a really tall order for them to get through. The rogue changes seem to be heavily oriented towards Mythic Plus, as Outlaw is just doing phenomenally. A significant portion of their legendaries are being brought down in power. This is unfortunate to PvP, obviously, as Outlaw, because you were kind of middle of the pack, not great, not excellent, and because you're so good at Mythic Plus, now nerfs to the things that are making you strong there are also going to make you weaker in PvP. Assassination receiving some nerfs as well. These were actually very strong legendaries in PvP as well, but obviously in Mythic Plus. And then Subtlety received a very significant change, one of the biggest that I think any spec did, which was the Akari Soul Fragment. After using Shadow Strike or Cheap Shot, your target suffers a Shadow Strike from the shadows 2 seconds later at 15% effectiveness. This thing got cut down to 50% and then got cut down to 15%. And this is where I'm really starting to wonder, like, are they cutting these legendaries down because they want this to be the final tuning, or are they cutting these legendaries down to a point where you just ignore them and try the other options so they can get more data? Because this is such a massive nerf to it. And this is really what was enabling Subtlety, ignoring the PvE trinkets that allow them to just one-shot somebody from stealth, right? So Subtlety Rogue might be not in a great place after this legendary change when it comes to PvP, and also in Mythic Plus, trying to tone it down, especially for their single target potential. Flagellation receiving some changes. This is one that I felt really difficult to actually use when it initially was coming out, so I am curious to see if I can make it work now. I'm definitely going to try, because this first iteration of this, I looked at it and I was like, I can't even get to the cap of the stacks to use it on a training dummy. So I just kind of ignored it. Now it looks like it's getting a little bit more polish on it. And this might actually be something that I will try and select. Again, this is going to be really good potentially for Subtlety, although it looks like it's changed from Mastery to Haste per stack up to a maximum of 20%, likely because Mastery was more beneficial to some specializations of Rogue than others. So changing it over to Haste might make it more desirable for multiple specs. Legendary changes here. Essence of the Bloodfang, you for 100% of the damage dealt. Nothing too big. Vanish remaining cooldown by 10 seconds. Again, just slight tweaks. This is a big one. 2 seconds after breaking stealth, you get 100% crits rather than 5 seconds. So two of the main focal point legendaries for Rogue get just like slammed down into the ground. So this is kind of why I was hesitant to give it as a recommended class, because it was so high up there that it felt like it was going to be one of the ones that get nerfed. Shamans, I think that they're just, yep. Okay, there's nothing there for you. Feels bad. Feels shaman, man. That is really unfortunate. I would have liked to have seen some changes to shaman, but not at the moment. We got legendary changes here for the Arms Warrior, with Battlelord receiving pretty big buffs to slam, Exploiter receiving some minor nerfs. Now with Condemn working with your honor talents to get charge execute, I was curious to see if a Condemn build came back for extra mobility on arms and then buffing this Mortal Strike. But I'm also noticing trends now that whenever certain legendary builds are like noticeable, where you see guides and people making tier lists and everything, and it's like right at the top, these are the ones that are getting targeted. So if you're out there trying to gather data and you're trying to research things, you may want to just kind of look at what's on top and then rotate your gaze down a couple steps to like, what's in third? What's third place right now in the beta? Because that's the one that's kind of like low key hanging out in a good spot and nobody's really talking about it. And then when the game comes out, oh, you're the best. That would be my plan, basically, especially with these just constantly being rearranged. But I just wanted to keep you all up to date. Fury receiving some nerfs, again, likely for Mythic Plus. Again, a downside for a spec that feels good in PvE and performs decently in PvE. Just underperforming in PvP and then receiving nerfs because it's so good in PvE. It's just really unfortunate for Fury, at least when it comes to PvE. And I think that's about it here for the changes. at least the ones that were most noticeable to me. As we can see, there were a lot of changes. I just wanted to talk about the ones that were standing out to me, give you a general idea of my thought process when it comes to the way I'm trying to think of the way that they're thinking, like a game within a game, a mind game within a mind game. So my plan personally would be to they buffed Adaptive Swarm to balance druids. I'm a bit confused by the tooltip when we got to that on druid. So this was necessary because this Necrolord was so terrible for balanced druids. This potentially opens up more options to multi-spec as well. That's also something that's going to be a bit of a problem when you go for a Covenant for your main spec, but then that Covenant is not good for your off spec. There's a lot that needs to be sorted out. This is kind of the first major tweak I've seen, and they gave it a real tweak. My biggest concern is that they're going to bring damage down too heavily, and then they're also bringing up a lot of these healing or absorb legendaries at the same time. And when it comes to PvP, I really don't want to be in that place where we're doing these long 50 to 80% dampening games where these legendaries and these trinkets are not even used in PvE and appear to solely exist to make PvP slower and less fun. So I'm really hoping that's not the case, but I just wanted to drop this video really quickly, give you an update, give you my opinions. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please leave it with a like. Comment down below what you think about these changes coming in and what you would like to see happen moving forward into Shadowlands. Check out my other videos. I've got tier lists. I'm constantly updating. I'm trying to stay on top of all of this actively and really just keep giving you information so that we can all try and make the right adjustment. And like I've already explained my main plan here with trying to jump down to that third place slot and kind of go from there if you're worried about something performing too well in the beta and then getting nerfed too heavily. Aside from that, thank you very much for watching, and we will see you in the next video.